Hello, Madison. It's Brianne Pitts, and I wanted to share with you the emerging concepts and finalized units for Washington, D.C. schools. After our last conversation, I walked away with the feeling that even though you said seeds and build on what the fellows gave you, that you were kind of disappointed by the lack of inquiry and connectedness amongst the standards. So I spent a great deal of time over the last month reworking all of the kindergarten standards and concepts to be more unified in a unit design. And I have a couple of proposed overarching unit frames that I think might be helpful in seeing the connections between the seeds that I'm leaving you with today. So this first video, I want to record a quick recap of where we were and where we are now, as well as at least my hope for how you might be able to integrate multiple concepts together into a shared unit design for each grade level. So I'm going to share my screen and I will talk through some of these different recaps. So our initial meetings, we talked about reviewing all of the standards, making sure that they make sense and linking to what the fellows had worked with to better organize a sense of flow. My first wave submissions came in October and November with initial revisions looking at grade K, concept 2, but I spent like 2 months working on that one concept and developing an interactive, basically, unit around Milo's museum and local museums, and learning about our history through different artifacts. So you said that's awesome, but too much content, can't afford it. Give us seeds. So build on what the fellows have, best opportunity plans, more inquiry. So next wave, I shared the grades 1, 2, and K mapping units. You asked me to reduce the number of resources, so I built an additional folder full of mapping materials. And you mentioned when we last talked, having a more integrative community building activity, especially for kindergarten. So in this third and fourth wave, I've been working on the units, developing outline documents for students to use and teachers to use for more materials. And after you and I connected when you got back in March, I shared the progress, and this is where I sort of sensed that you were not the most pleased with what I had shared. So here's my revisions. I have revised all of the kindergarten lesson plans to more adequately align to a concept of students taking on the roles of city planners, and they are community organizers and planners in their classroom and serve as role models in the larger DC community. In grade 1, I've proposed a unit around reporting, honest and fair news reporting, and these are DC change makers who are going to explore multiple perspectives in media production throughout the year by presenting news stories and multiple representations of identities in DC and around the world. In second grade, the revisions have looked at how can we more adequately use example artifacts and resources around different types of communication and innovation to have students develop an international passport of understanding different cultures and communities. So each of these different units connect with civics, geography, history, and economics, the behavioral sciences, and the district's history and social science standards. So in each unit, you'll see today as I record these videos, I've included a kindergarten toolkit and then the unit to accompany the kindergarten standards. This unit to accompany the kindergarten standards talks through the concept of kinder leaders. This is a kindergarten leadership team that was created by a group of Washingtonian parents, educators, and community leaders who recognize the brilliance of their kindergarten community and invite them to lead by modeling through creation of a classroom community that focuses on proactive and restorative justice. So these leaders would be leading through a sense of Ubuntu, that each of us are connected and work and play together. The kindergarten leaders would be charged with making their community work for the people who live, work, and play within it, embodying the jobs and responsibilities that make their communities great, exploring fair and equitable practices while learning from the history in the community and recognizing the brilliance of DC as a place to live, work, and play together. So they'll take on this role of being a kinder leader by studying through each of the different units in the grade level. They'll pretend to be and not even pretend, actually embody the roles of historians, geographers, economists, civic leaders, and sociologists. They'll be introduced to the concept by being offered an introduction to the role, that they'll be making their community more fun, fair, just, and inclusive. And they have examples from multiple identities around the world in each of the different concepts. So what does that look like? I'm going to share a video of each of the kindergarten concepts, talking through how the different standards approach this idea of developing a community of care. And this was devised based on a restorative justice technique that was created by University of Wisconsin Center for Justice. And I have tried it in classrooms with little children as well as adults. And the difference here is that this is modeled for DC classrooms, and I have put throughout the different units links to the kinder leaders. So thank you so much for exploring this with me. I will send you additional concepts later today, but take a look at these different first grade concepts and how I received them, many of which were completely empty, including kinder concept, I believe, 3 and 5. This is the resources from your different consultants, but beyond that, the unit I made up. So I do believe that I've given more than seeds and included lots of unit possibilities. I also have mapped literally and figuratively, well, you can't see it because I blurred the background, but the connections between the different units, so that should we wish to continue together, you can draw on these different activities and ideas to connect all concepts into one overarching unit. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you for first grade and second grade later today. Are my units in draft form for just the K units of study. And there is the sample unit to accompany kindergarten. So here is the folder for all of the kindergarten revisions, the toolkit example, the unit that I propose to link with this, which I'm affectionately calling Kinder Leaders Working Together. And the premise of this unit design would be that the students are forming a community where people live, work, and have fun together in the classroom, and that the city planners of Washington, D.C. help to maintain a safe, helpful, and fun place to live. And just like these professionals, the students in our classrooms create those types of communities. And drawing from the spirit of Ubuntu, that we all are better through the unity, I am because we are, or I am because you are, as Desmond Tutu says. We need one another to make our community great. And so we're going to draw on students' funds of knowledge, on their community-based activities on the different regions in DC, their mapping activities to design a community for people who live, work, and play. We're going to consider embodying the jobs and responsibilities of our community. We're going to explore fair and equitable practices and learn from the history and preservation of different DC communities. So in each exploration under the idea of Kinder Leaders or Kindergarten Leaders project, the kids would take on the roles of the city planner. And according to the DC district website, the Office of Planning says that the district planner performs planning for neighborhoods, corridors, districts, historic preservation, public facilities, park, and open spaces. So all of the places that the children like to live, learn, and play, all of the places that they work. So they can examine the life of a city planner in a day, and then you all can talk about the different ways that city planners would need to be conscious of the different roles of community members in Washington, D.C. So the unit connections, I was just putting in, I still need to put in some more, but working together, they're going to take active roles in developing community programs and expectations. They're going to show why the history matters and become curators and historians who are building community stories, including the voices that are missing in Washington, D.C., so that they can make claims about how people in society have changed over time. Then they'll explore who they are by celebrating their community differences, their abilities and interests through undermining oppression and working through collective action. In 4, I believe that's Where I Live. They're going to really look at where they are. This is where they could build that community within the classroom. They could make little, cardboard box buildings and really have the classroom become managed by consumers and producers. They could build different businesses, take on different roles, become the community helpers that they're learning about, so that this is an active investigation that doesn't play down to students, but encourages them to take on active roles. So the premise is that a group of Washingtonian parents, educators, and students met to discuss the school year ahead and realized that these community leaders, these kindergarten brains and hearts and minds are brilliant, and that these youth are going to be the leaders of the next generation. So we want to encourage them by helping them build the skills of historians, geographers, economists, civic leaders, and sociologists working with their community. These kinder leaders would get a letter inviting them to lead their classroom community towards more just and fair societies. So really, they're becoming civically conscious citizens through creating a community together. They are looking at how the school is a community, fairness and justice through Indigenous tales. They're exploring how students are working as sociologists and describing the responsibilities in their part of classrooms and communities, the different families, et cetera, et cetera. So where did we come from? Grade 1, Concept 1, you can see there was a significant amount of content here. So my revised content just built on that, but there's a lot of connections to the Kinder Leaders unit, and I put in a decent amount about different identities. So they're looking at respect and how we work together. They're developing the skills of community leaders and critical scholars. They're going to use the different ideas of global inquiry and civic pluralism, and they're going to build on the roles and responsibilities. So I inserted some of this Kinder Leaders plan so that they know the types of communities they're a part of. They can brainstorm the different communities they're a part of, look at images, use sentence prompts to fix that up. They can explore where they live and where they play, or look out from my window and compare their community to students' communities around the world. This gets away from normalizing the local and immediate and exposing them to other resources and materials outside of their classroom. So how does our community membership help us feel safe and valued? We look at some different examples in the community. We also maybe build a classroom mantra, and we can use these lesson plans to help us develop that. We widen our scope of what different families and caregivers look like. We consider the definition of family from the Human Rights Campaign, which comes back in Concept 3 and 5. We can look at different books of families, including some that have been banned in other places, like Todd Parr's Book of Families. And we can look at the differences and similarities in our different families. This Arabic quilt and immigrant story is about a kindergartner who comes and has a different language. Lunch from Home was recommended by one of your other fellows or prior consultants, and it's about food stories. I've also included some links about food stories in later explorations, which will help to spiral to our exploration of the world in grade 2. So cultural and social factors in families, looking at how we can create self-portraits, how we can identify different things on the internal and external. So what is seen and unseen about our identities? What makes us the same and different? How is that connected to our families? How can we drive these discussions considering our classroom as a community that we can form with respect and a decision towards fairness and equality, as well as equity? And not equality, equity. But that students would need to have those definitions and opportunities in tow. So I tried to really give teachers the background that Katie Solwell and your other consultants described as being inclusive, multi-generational, representative of the local community. So these kinder leaders are going to be looking to the adults in their community to explore differences. Here in this standard, as they're looking at historical and present day individuals who made the community more just and fair, we lead into fairness and inclusiveness with able-bodiedness and differences in how we work, live, and play. This builds on the cultural components later, but also the seen and unseen challenges that many of our students may or may not have. We look at the compelling compass. These are some of your OSSE resources that I've embedded in here. We move together, so front loading the different ways that different bodied individuals can interact, and also deafness here in a multiple ASL translation of how people play. It's also created by a CODA individual, so from the community, but looking at physical differences, speech differences, language differences, body differences, the smallest girl in the smallest grade, also from Solwell. So these are really rich resources that I hope your community members can pull from. So while it's a lot, I tried to make it worthwhile. These build then, how have individuals with different abilities, looking at Justina Miles, the woman who did the sign language for the Super Bowl, who's a young Black deaf American woman who is incredibly vivacious, got on a bunch of different media platforms and spoke about her identity, the multiple ways that she'd been marginalized, and how she wanted to be a positive representation for others. We also look at Jennifer Keelan, who, while the critique from social justice books is that she alone is not the movement, I think that her conversations about the other people in the movement and the other links here to what the ADA is and how that was led in your community in DC could be a really phenomenal connection to the local community and to seeing students as being able to be justice oriented. So here's Jennifer Keelan in discussion in this YouTube. And then I have examples of how family members have changed perspective, looking at the modified international symbol of access and how people move. So modernizing handicap parking signs and cutting down on the perception that people who have different abilities live a stationary life. So we look at some example lesson plans. Little leaders could take these as some of the first lessons describing the rules and consequences. There's some examples from Katie Solwell and Noreen Rodriguez's anti-oppressive social studies in here that I embedded. We can also look at ASL storytelling to use a traditional story from kindergarten classes. David goes to school, or Know David with ASL. So we're looking at multimodal ways of knowing and representing identity in classrooms within the standard. These picture book supplements were represented by the teachers. I think that the teachers themselves will have better examples of the rules, but there's lots of rule sheets you can Google if you want an example. But what happens when we don't follow the rules? Again, Know David, considering this Indigenous ball game, and thinking about fairness again with the ways that we include or exclude. So looking at Indigenous student-led voices, it's really, really inclusive here. How we be an includer, using Learning for Justice, using social justice books, connecting to different social scientists who have cited these funds of knowledge, for example. So sharing the seeds, these weren't all devised when I got it, but how do we do better together than all alone? This ties back into kinder and kinder leaders. The skills for respectful conversations. I put in productive talk protocols here that include questions and the literature that help develop social studies questioning what respect means to our students and how we can use visuals. Here is the discussion protocol that comes from my former classroom practice, but from many literacy scholars talking about productive classroom talk, dialogue. It's in the spirit of Frary. It's a productive classroom conversation. So this is an example of introducing the talk protocol to a first grade classroom of look, listen, and respond. There's then an observation of a classroom in student-led conversation through interactive read aloud with example slides for productive talk and students' time to think, sentence prompts, and different examples there. So that's Unit 1. First grade concept 2 looked like this when you first gave it to me. It was the feedback one that you had shared. You and I went through this one already together but the unit connects through concept two, through the lesson plan and unit outline. This Milo's Museum would fit right with kinder leaders that were able to use the artifacts in our community and in our history to help other people understand our community, our identities, and so much more, chronological order, etc. So lots of lesson pieces in here, analyzing artifacts from the different museums, primary sources, and observe, reflecting, and wonder. This comes from both the Library of Congress and modified sources from, let me see here, something education. So they're all linked with citations, including Sheg historical context questions. I feel really confident about these communication symbols as being artifacts that students are going to build on in grade 2. So I'm super excited about that, but the telephone being fairly accessible, a significant change. This also is going to lead to Unit 3, where they're looking at representation, how the artifacts in the community make sense over time. When you talked about somebody who could see those big connections, I actually jotted out what Kinder Leaders looks like and how all the leaders and units connect. You can't see it, but it's a unit map of all the different connections between 3, 5, 1, exploring what we map in our community, the artifacts that we find, where we find them in our community from DC. So now I feel like I'm rambling, but I'm really excited about how these different units now talk back and forth to one another. And we're going to be looking at the March on Washington and all sorts of different representations in later units. So then we get into concept 3, who I am. Here are some of your Asian American historical resources that were shared by your prior consultants. And then this standard was missing completely. So I completely wrote this standard. So if it doesn't meet the expectations, apologies, happy to take more, but I tried to build on your initial feedback so that students are looking at all kinds of diverse identities now, different abilities. They're building on the same mentor text about deaf and hard of hearing individuals, different able-bodiedness individuals, thinking about helpers in their communities and how different helpers can have different bodies and needs around the world. These are also recommended by your OSSE resources, helping look for more accessibility in your school and community, looking to be change makers through examples like Emmanuel's Dream with a one-legged young man who rode across Africa to bring awareness to his disability. He had a series of different life challenges and a really successful story with pictures that you can look up his journey. Also Temple Grandin, so thinking about somebody who comes from a different way of mentally knowing and how we can be inclusive of different body types and identities, even in I Can Play Too, so taking a silly turn. And then this is Katie Solwell's recommendation from one of her units that students would create a similarity in different quilt squares. So I tried to use the resources you provided and the fellows provided to build the best resourced unit. But a lot of the stuff is not out there for this grade level, so it's a matter of creating it. Here explaining the contributions of individuals with different gender, racial, religious, and ethnic identities and statuses. I tried to pull local examples in the present and historical aspect that you could connect. So what extent are we able to choose who we are? What's the difference between what's a seen and unseen ability or difference? How do our identities change over time? So really extensive questions here about who we are and how we're represented. They can look at the identity concept through C3 teachers. And this is an interactive media and news literacy exhibit that was created by a communications professor who wants students to see how diverse stories of different perspectives in the United States are. These are all different individuals who are commenting on videos of their identity being represented in popular media. So this is an example for teachers that you might want to play an example of Daniel Tiger and something that he did, and then ask students, how does this represent you or how doesn't? I believe that Daniel Tiger is an example in Michael's video here. And there's a couple of different ones that teachers could learn through. So This is sorry, Keith, I'm recording. Um, so oh, oh,
Sorry, I bothered you.
no, you're okay. Alexa, hang up. Shoot. Cut. So, coming back, looking at how media assigns our collective identities, this would be great. Our first graders who are going to be reportive change makers could connect to this unit and interview different kindergartners about their diverse identities in the future. We can look at LGBTQ identities here. We can look at examples of how women's perspectives have changed with Mary Edwards Walker and what she wanted to wear. These are from your other consultants. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, so local justice. And then how did two different African American men expand the narratives of their communities? The examples I've given here are Russ Green, who runs a consulting firm and an impact group to help support women and children in the local area. He also promotes golf for young men of color and especially Black men. He's also a comedian and has a strong commitment to his family. So this could potentially be a strong counter narrative. And then we could look at Carter D. Woodson and how he also had a strong counter narrative in terms of how he was educating individuals when schools were not very just or fair. So looking at these contributions and then identifying times that people used power unfairly, looking at power and how representation and inclusion in the classroom is in there, looking at disability justice as well as language justice, again, building on the prior standards, looking at how we can play and share justly, looking at Gallaudet University and its connection to local Asian American history through the deaf Asian American experience represented on a local mural, looking at FAIR, using our six senses, and more on fairness here. Then we explore different murals from communities around large cities, including Washington, D.C., to look at how different communities and cultures play, communicate, live, and learn, and explain how individuals can be different but have all kinds of human rights. So that is that standard. And then in concept 4, where I live, again, this standard was completely blank, so I built it from the ground up. And in this concept, the geography standard, it's pretty cut and dry, but again, can be replaced with the standards that we talked about for students building in the classroom. And finally, kindergarten concept 5 had some of the standards filled out, mostly here, the scarcity in the classroom and world and how we use products in our daily lives. And so in this standard, rather than just normalizing capitalism, students can take on the different roles of leaders in the community, the different jobs and diverse experiences through the tools, outfits, and explorations of different goods and services around the world. I tried to make it as internationally possible as humanly possible. You said you didn't like these standards about wants versus needs because they were pretty capitalistic and really basic. So Katie Solwell recommended using these Maslow's hierarchy of needs so that students are not just looking at wants and needs as being physical, but also physiological and psychological, and that students are helping to self-actualize these needs and explore multiple concepts here. So while they can look at traditional wants and needs, like I want a bike, you'd mentioned this text, a bike like Sergio's, but it is not recommended because it actually can degrade poverty. So while these books are good examples, even they have some challenges. So instead, I shared a unit with some images on wants and needs that students can evaluate, as well as some simple sorts. But then we gave some space needs simulations from kindergarten units that Katie Solwell had developed. And I tried to outline how these were connected to kinder leaders and how these can be connected to the human rights aspect, as well as how this connects back all the way to kindergarten concept 1. So kindergarten concepts 1, 3, and 5 are really connected to the kindergarten leaders concept, and that's mostly the overview for kinder leaders or kinder leaders and all of the different finalized units for kindergarten OS OSSE, Washington, D.C. I'm sorry this was a long recording. I'll try to be briefer in my upcoming ones, but I wanted you to hear from me the rationale for why I included these resources and how I have reworked the units since our last conversation. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon with another grade level.